Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Infinite Me, where every day, well, maybe not every day, we've been disappeared for a few days, so we're back today talking about what it looks like to live an infinite life and how you don't have to awaken to that. You already are infinite, and we're just expanding our awareness of what we actually already are. So conversations all around topics to do with living that in our 3D reality and how we go about doing that. So I'm Mandy, and over there is Nat.
Hello.
And we are the Infinite Me. And the last conversation we had was a few days ago, and it was around the flow and what that can start to look like when you start to step more into the way, knowing yourself as an infinite being and moving from that space, and then how things just start to fall into place on the outside. The outer story starts to match that flow. So that was a good conversation, and some circumstances that were happening for Nat that were unfolding that were kind of quite sort of hilarious, just to kind of see how intricate the details get sometimes. The universe starts to make things flow your way, sort of thing, the stories that unfold that you couldn't actually write if you tried, sort of thing sometimes. So, check out that conversation. So today we're going back to our infinite lucky dip, which is our little bag of topics that we pull one out in the moment to see what the topic is going to be. And we've just thrown these topics in over time, or it could be a quote or something that we've read or a story we've heard or something. And so we pull something out, and that is our topic for the day. So
bag of tricks.
Right, so we'll do a draw.
Okay, here we go.
Hopefully we can remember what we put in here.
And the topic is ready.
Can't grab one. Can't grab one. They're all like stuck together. Like, okay.
Right. All right, here we go. Fluoro yellow.
Okay. No, it's orange, I think.
Oh, orange.
Power versus force.
Oh, blimey. Okay. All right. Power versus force. Okay.
Yes.
Power versus force. This is a book called
Yes,
Power versus Force, and I should look up who actually wrote it.
I think it's David Hawkins.
Yes, I think you might be
David Hawkins.
Yes.
Yep.
So you may have actually read this book. I don't think I've actually read it the entire way through, but I certainly know the concept of what it's talking about. And I guess this really is tapping into the infinite side of things, as opposed to the human side. So the force part generally is the human side, and the flow and power part obviously is the infinite side.
Yep. Yes. So I'd say I have read the book, but it's been a long time since I read it. But I just remember, like, going in the context of everything that we talk about here, I guess, at the Infinite Me, is that whole idea, like what you're just saying, that the power aspect comes from, it's not from, I guess, the egoic kind of power that we might think of when we think sometimes power. We think, oh, that sounds like forcing things to happen, but it's more talking about that infinite power that we can tap into when we step into that space of knowing ourselves as the infinite being that we are here in the world. Whereas force is definitely when we fall into that ego mindset of trying to make things happen. Like we feel our separation. We don't feel like we're an infinite being. We feel like we're this little limited human in the world, and we need to kind of make things happen and control things and force it to happen. So because we're trying to get an outcome, or we don't think an outcome will go our way, so we need to sort of manipulate circumstances sometimes, or people, or conversations to get our way, so that we feel safe in the world. So that's my interpretation of the power versus force.
Definitely. And it's interesting with the egoic power type thing. Like we seesaw backwards and forwards. We see this all the time. We either think that we're really in our power, egoic power, and that we can make all these things happen. I've got my goals and my intentions, and I've got my vision board, or whatever we're doing type thing. Like you get this sort of hyped up feeling, like, and it doesn't have to be vision boards and all that sort of stuff, but there's definitely that hyped up feeling of like, oh, I've got all this power type thing, and I'm gonna make all this stuff happen. And that definitely is that sort of egoic type power. Where it is quite hyped. Like there's a lot of talk, and it sort of seems to be more talk than action oftentimes. So that's sort of an indication that you're in it. It does feel like a hyped up energy.
A bit more strategy too, like strategy behind what you're doing.
Yeah, you're looking at, definitely looking at strategies and stuff like that. You get disappointed when things don't flow the way you think they're going to flow. And so they're pretty sure, all of those sorts of things are pretty sure indicators that you've had egoic power. But then the seesaw of that is because whenever we're up in the ego, then we're also going to have the corresponding downtime. Because that's the balance. So because we are seesawing and we're not actually in balance, which is, you know, the infinite power, where we're tapping in back into love and the flow and that state that we've all experienced many, many times, which is that natural state. So if you're going to have the up state in the egoic state, you're also going to have the down state. So that's where you feel like everything's overwhelming. There's too much to do. There's so many things on my to-do list. I tried to make this happen and it's just not working out. I can't find the flow today. Like just all this stuff, you get sick. Like all these things start showing up that don't bring you back and humbles you again, because usually when you're in the up state, you're feeling pretty chuffed with yourself. And, you know, sometimes maybe even putting other people down in the pit type thing, like you're feeling like you're perhaps better than them, or you've got it in the bag, you've worked out the solution now, you sort of know exactly what's going to happen. It actually doesn't turn out that way. And that's so you do feel that corresponding, okay, well, now nothing's working type thing. You know, like, and then you just throw your hands in the air because nothing seems to be working at that point. So it's like, okay, how do you stop this seesawing aspect of life type thing? Like you know, particularly if you're running a project or a business type thing, you can really experience that seesawing. Stuff is really, really tough. So that's the egoic supposed power. But in actual fact, what you're doing is forcing everything. Generally, if you get underneath it, you'll actually see that you have been doing exactly what you're saying, man. Employing strategies, manipulations. I think they're two big ones, the strategies and manipulations. I've really noticed how many times I've tried to manipulate situations when you're really honest, and this is such a hard thing to be, because the ego sort of feels really crushed when you say it. But you know, I've had to admit many times to Jody, or you know, to myself, sort of thing. It's like, well, I'm really trying to manipulate you right now, like to get what I want. Like,
because you think the outcome is
it's not what I expect.
You think it's going to give you a certain. You're going to get something from that outcome. That could be like getting love from that outcome too. It might not necessarily mean that you get to be right or something like that. Sometimes it's just trying to not feel hurt by somebody, so you manipulate the situation so you get a sense of love because they hang around you or something, or they change their mind and they don't go to something to be with you or something like that. So that's sometimes you got to be very like I said, very honest with yourself with when you are trying to do something out of a need versus a genuine kind of feeling, a true feeling that you're trying to get from.
Definitely. So that there's definitely always an element of force in that egoic power, when you really break it down and you're really honest with yourself, that you are basically forcing outcomes. You've got an agenda, you want a certain outcome, and it might be a little agenda, it might be a big agenda. You really are doing everything in your power to make sure that outcome comes about. So definitely that's a force. You know, you're not using your infinite power. You're not using your intuition generally. You're trying to strategize. You're using logic. Like, this is the outcome I want, because whenever we're using logic and you're using the egoic power, there's always cause and effect. So it's sort of like, if I can cause this to happen, then this will be the outcome that I get. And so there's this linear sort of line drawn in the mind about how, because that's how it works. And you know, it's A to B. And so it's like, well, I've always done this strategy. So when I do this strategy, I know I'll get this outcome.
That outcome.
So I'm going to do this again. I'm just going to keep using that strategy. So there's a real repetitive sort of feeling to it. Like if you really did sort of dive into it a bit more, or you have that reflection. I know Jodie's reflected back to me, and I've done that to her at times. It's like, well, you always do this, like, and that, even that you should generalize, I suppose, but there is that element of like, you use this strategy a lot, like to get your outcome sort of thing. I'm just letting you know that. It's like, oh, shit, you're right, I do. Like, so that's an opportunity to really let that go, that strategy, and sort of go, okay, that's either it's not working anymore, and like I guess as we become more conscious, we find the strategies that we used to do, even subconsciously, don't work anymore.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. They're not meant to work anymore.
Yeah.
So you can wake up and go, oh shit, okay, this is not working anymore.
Well, they don't feel right like anymore because you have an awareness now that you are manipulating, or it is coming from not from a true place. So it just feels, it doesn't feel congruent anymore to use that as a strategy. Like it just feels like, I don't need to do that anymore. It does feel like I'm coming from a very limited place when I use that strategy now, and that's not who I identify myself as now. So it is, and that's probably why, like you said, it doesn't work anymore, because you don't actually need it. It's become sort of redundant. Yeah, that's the word I was going to say. Yeah, relevant or redundant now as a strategy for the ego.
Asking the question, like, what would happen if I didn't use the strategy anymore? Just having that open space for it to be something else.
Yes.
And not come up with a new strategy.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
Allow it to be whatever it wants to be.
Yeah.
I found another one.
Yeah. I suppose that's where it becomes important to learn how to tap into your inherent power, I guess, then, because like that, as we already said, you're already infinite. Like we're just expanding our awareness of that. Like we've hidden that from our view. So the more that we can bring awareness to these things that come up, like the strategies, or maybe someone points it out to us, or we just start to become aware of where we are trying to get an outcome because of a need. The ego is always looking to satisfy a need. That's how you can usually tell when it's an ego thing, because you're trying to get an outcome. We've sort of said the 5 things that the ego always looks for. Let's see if I can remember them. It's always, you got acceptance, appreciation, approval, recognition, and security. So the ego is always looking for one of those 5 things, which it feels like is love. When it gets one of those 5 things, that equates to love in the ego's definition, if you like. So we can always, so once we bring awareness to how we're operating, sometimes we can say, okay, was I trying to get one of those needs satisfied? Then we know that we're coming from that ego space, versus that power to me feels more like it feels like a certainty and just a knowingness of who you truly are, and you don't actually need to influence the other person to get an outcome. It may come across that you actually do then have an influence on that person, but that's not your motivation to do it. Like it's just, it comes from a true place. So maybe you're having a conversation with somebody and you just say what needs to be said in that moment because it moves through you, and it's coming from this place of certainty of who you are, knowing who you truly are. It may not be who that person is, or it may push their buttons even sometimes, but you just know it's true for you to speak that based on what's true for you. And so it comes across, the other person is always going to interpret it as however they're going to interpret it through their own filters, but it doesn't feel like a forceful thing to you anymore, because you know it's not coming, you're not trying to get an outcome from it, you're just speaking a truth or taking an action that feels true to you in the moment, and you're not attached to how that's going to actually unfold, and it will unfold however it's going to unfold, and you don't have a judgment, I guess, on how it unfolds either. So that power feels like I don't know, it feels like a creative aspect more than anything, like that it can be anything. It is that unknown potential that you're tapping into, and you're sort of not attached to how it is going to unfold in the moment. So it could actually be anything, because you're not actually seeking to get a need satisfied. You're not, you know who you truly are. So you're not looking for that external validation of yourself or love from somebody else. And it may come as a reciprocal thing. Someone might respond to you in that moment, but that's like a bonus, if you like, kind of thing. It's not the intention behind why you do things. And that's probably why the power lands, why people probably respond to you differently when you come from that space too, because they can sense that you're coming from a true place most of the time. If they're in a receptive, open place too, they will see the place that you're coming from as well, and it will be heard as that. And you can sort of feel that inherent power in somebody when they come from that space too. So
it definitely feels different, and everyone would have experienced this at different times, sort of thing, where either you felt totally in your true power and there's no need for anything, there's no agendas, as you're saying, you just sort of, and that really does come from knowing yourself, when you can stand in that power and just like, I don't need anything from the outside world, I'm here to just play with it all. Everything that I need comes from within, comes from, you know, the infinite source, whether that be God, universe, infinite, whatever you like to identify with, coming through you in the human form and playing out in our world into reality. So it's actually using you as a channel to create itself in reality. So when you really get that science and that concept of here's the infinite power, here's you as a little human being type thing, who's not actually who you are, but you've been given a body right now to play with. And it comes through you out into the 3D reality screen. Then just reminding yourself of that process, because that's the truth. Like, it's not out there. All these people are not just out there. They're all projections of your consciousness. So they're showing up exactly and reflecting back to you exactly what's going on for you in your consciousness. So it's always got to come back to you and what's going on. So in actual fact, sort of going out and forcing something, like trying to get an outcome or trying to lose weight or trying to make more money or trying to fix this relationship, then it's putting the power outside of you automatically. You're saying to yourself, I believe that all those things exist out there and that I can change them up. When in actual fact, something that's already manifested and already created in reality actually can't be changed at all. Like, it doesn't work that way. The science doesn't work that way. So it is about coming back to you all the time and then sitting with that and the space, having the space, not filling it with a whole bunch of stuff with strategies and ideas and not that you never have ideas, but the ideas come to you type thing. You're not trying to purposely force ideas and solutions and strategies and things like that. Like, there is such a difference. And I think that's the difference between thinking and pondering and thinking and maybe masterminding. And masterminding is good if you allow it to be in the creative space where you're allowing enough space in the masterminding space. And you might be bouncing ideas off another person or a group of people and stuff. You can tell when you're in that, everybody's in that creative flow. Like, everyone's just like popping up with ideas. How about we do this? How about we do that? And they feel really expansive. They feel crazy. It's almost like, oh my God, I don't think we could even do that. Like, could we even do that? Like, that sounds so out there.
You don't get stuck in the how that thing's going to unfold. You're just in the pure creative potential of the idea.
And then suddenly it all falls into place and you go, oh, that's it. Like, let's do this. And then it's sort of like, oh, I don't know, how are we going to do that? Like, it's almost too big and too out there and too creative for you even to have the habits. And there's a reason for that, so that you don't get involved in that process because you're not involved. So that's the true expansive masterminding or like pondering, I guess. And so that is the difference between thinking about something and pondering something. Pondering is giving space to something. It's allowing the ideas and the
bringing awareness.
Like
with that.
The next steps, like, ring this person, research this stuff, sign up for that, like all this thing. It's giving you all the steps, but we're just not giving it the space to actually come in and be that infinite steps. We're trying to step in there and go, I don't have the next step. I need it now. Like, this has got to be done now. It's got to be done. And again, we're bringing in that concept of time, which we've talked about so many times, that when you get caught, like oftentimes when you get in that space, you can almost guarantee that you've got caught back in the limited amounts of time you have available for something. So in your mind, it's like, oh, I've got to get this done next week, or there's a deadline or a contract I'm trying to meet, or like all these things that we put in place in the human agenda and the human concept is all based around time. And so that's when it's so difficult not to step back into the ego power, trying to find power in the ego sense, because you feel like you have to control it again because there's a set time limit on something. And I've witnessed this in myself so many freaking times that I finally realized it always was time again. If I took the time away, and I said, I've got as much time as I need, and it's infinite amounts of time, and there's no time limit on this thing. Suddenly I'm relaxed again, and I'm back in the flow. And it's like, oh God, like that is amazing how many times that happens. It's 1:11 here in Belgium right now. There you go. Yeah, it's incredible how many times time is actually the essence of the issue. Putting me back into the force again.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say, it always feels like it is an outside thing that's controlling you. And I say thing because it could be a paradigm like time, or it could be a person, or it could be, but it is always that thing that's outside of you, and you're trying to change something that's outside of you, which we've talked about many a times. You actually can't do in the way the reality actually works. Like, you can't actually affect that change outside of you. It may look like you're sometimes making something happen on the outside of you, but it's always coming from inside of you first. It has to come through as an action through you first to then the story morphs around outside of you. So it always feels, I guess, when you come from that force place, it does feel very hard and feels like a struggle at times. And exactly like the word force means, like, it's that kind of, it does mean like you're trying to push your way through something, and that's what it does feel like when you're in that space, like you're trying to juggle things. And as you said, sometimes time is that factor. We're racing against something, a structure that we put around ourselves to get an outcome at the end of the day. So whereas that power, what was sort of coming to me, I guess, is that power feels like it lives in the infinite space. It's in that formless space, whereas force lives in the form, like in the finite 3D world. So like it's kind of, when we force something, it always feels like it's outside of us. So it is in the finite physical world. And when we tap into our infinite true power, then it's still in that formless place. Like we tap into this, it's like an energy still. It doesn't exist in the form yet, and we get to sort of channel it through our body and bring it into the world in the form of an action or a project or a conversation that we get to then bring into the world too. So so it feels, I know, I guess it's just that differentiation. Sometimes you need to sort of differentiate how it feels in your body sometimes as well. Like, you can check in with yourself when you notice you might be forcing, and sort of just see how that feels. And does it feel like you're struggling? Does it feel like you're pushing against something? You're trying to change the outside world versus tapping into what feels true for you and knowing that you're actually safe in that space. Like, we're always just trying to look for safety on the outside of us. When the ego's in control, it doesn't feel safe because it's feeling separate from our infinite power. Whereas when we tap into that infinite power and we know ourselves as that, then we always feel safe. And it doesn't matter how the outside world responds, then we always feel like we are tapped into who we truly are at the end of the day. So you can't get it wrong when you're in that space. There is no right or wrong. It doesn't actually exist. It's just a true movement for you that comes through you. And that's that power. To me, that's what that feels like, is that.
I think that about sums it up. I think that's a good point. It's either, if it's really outside of you, you're seeing all the things show up on the outside world and your focus is on the outside world, then you're back in ego forcing.
Yes.
Even though it might feel like you've got lots of power.
Yes.
That's the illusion.
Yes. I was going to say, I think that's what it is, isn't it? We feel like we have to force things from the outside world because it's almost that going back to that micromanaging the universe type scenario, that we feel like we need to control things so that we get what we want and we satisfy our needs and we feel loved and we don't feel like people walk all over us, and all the different sort of scenarios that we run in our head might happen if we let go of control that we've projected outside of us. Whereas that true power comes from that knowing that we don't actually have to affect any change outside of ourselves. It is just how we feel about ourselves on the inside, and then acting on whatever feels true for us in the moment. So we don't actually feel the need to control anything when it comes from that place. But in sort of an irony, I suppose, is that that's actually when you've got the most probably control over anything, is when you actually come from that space. Coming from the ego control aspect, you don't really have very much control over anything at all, because it's all coming from that scarcity mindset that I'm small, I'm limited, I'm powerless. I have to kind of make this thing happen so that I feel important, or I feel like I got something right, or I feel loved. And it doesn't, you don't feel good about yourself, I don't think, at the end of the day. When you're honest with yourself in that space, you don't actually feel powerful when you're in that space. Sometimes, like, maybe you might for a moment, depending on the outcome, I suppose, you might have a momentary feeling of, oh wow, I made that thing happen, but then you kind of come down off that high, like what you're saying, in the beginning, about that really built up kind of sense of power, if you like, the ego power. Like, it's not sustainable, and it's not fulfilling, really, like not in the long term. Like, it might be a really short term sort of fix of feeling like, oh, I achieved something, but then you find that you come back down off that pretty quickly. And that's when you know it isn't coming from that space. It was actually a force, not actual true power, that you're tapping into.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's you can definitely feel the difference, and it's sort of like you go along feeling almost kidding yourself type thing, that you're in your true power. It's such a fine line. Like, you have to be so honest with yourself, because it is like so minute, the difference between the infinite power and the ego power. The ego gets very clever at imitating, the infinite. And that's where we do have to, particularly the more conscious we become, the more it gets like that. And so you have to be so onto it. And, that really is about being totally 100% honest with yourself all the time, asking yourself the question, where am I sitting with this right now? Is that true? Then you sort of bubble along, and then things start to really fall apart. Things are not happening anymore, and you're not getting the outcomes you wanted, and it seemingly all falls apart, to get to the point of like surrendering, throwing your hands up, going, I don't know how to do this now. Like, this is not working. Everything I tried doesn't work. And sometimes we have major crashes like that, like really big life-changing crashes like that. And other times it just bubbles along, and we might have it once a week or once a month, or just whatever type thing. But that you do reach that point of that surrender of like, okay, none of this is working now. I really don't know what I'm doing. And then that's the invitation. That's the doorway to the infinite coming back in, going, thank you. I've been waiting for you to move aside so I can actually do what I'm here to do. And so finally you do surrender that ego supposed power, but more force. And suddenly the infinite can come into that space again. You've invited it back in. So that's why surrender and vulnerability is such an important attribute in our journey here, to really go, I actually don't know what I'm doing. That's the best thing you could say. Like, it's so fearful to the ego, because the ego wants to know that, well, everyone seems to think I know everything, and I think I know everything, and I've got it all together, and I've got this, and I've got to keep the front up of all of that bullshit story. But in actual fact, you're falling apart on the inside, because it's not true. But instead of just being really vulnerable and humble in the first place, and I guess that's why we keep getting humbling circumstances. If you're getting lots of humbling circumstances, then it's because you're trying to use force all the time and not stepping into that infinite power. It's trying to get you back to that space of, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. I need some help here, and throwing your hand up and asking for help, like literally asking for it, going, I need help right now. It's probably the best place you could be.
I don't know space. I was going to say, other thing I was just going to say around that, we talk about the humbling circumstances, just thinking around, sometimes things come from a true space, like they start off as a true feeling that you're following, and then the ego gets a hook in it, like we've spoken about many times before. So you might still have like a 95% like of your action still comes from that true space, but then there'll be this little ego pattern that's happening in the background. So just upon reflection, you can bring some awareness to that. So sometimes you might get an outside reflection of that, like a response from somebody which triggers something within you, which is how you know, like, that there was something that wasn't a true feeling. When you get a feeling come up, like arises within you, like an emotional response triggered to someone. So that's always that opportunity to look at what that actually is, rather than the story that's happening outside of you. It's more about the emotion that's being triggered within you. So I can even just, an example of like the video that we had posted it could have been a couple of weeks ago now, it was like a rant video, and there was definitely like a very true space that message came from for me. Like it was a very visceral feeling that moved through me. But there was also these other little ego patterns that I noticed came up throughout little interactions I had with people afterwards, and different comments that people had said, that there was these other little patterns of kind of going, oh, there was an aspect of me that wanted to be right there. There was an aspect of me that felt like it was made wrong there. I didn't get heard in that aspect and understood as, you know, and that was a childhood pattern of not feeling like I was heard and misunderstood, you know. So there was those patterns are not very strong in me anymore at all, but they were still obviously there, like little remnants of those patterns that were just coming up for moments. And so it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Got to see that aspect and then see it for what it was. And then it kind of goes, like, just sort of feel that emotion come up, bring that awareness and that space to it, like we've talked about before, and not judging it and just sort of going, oh, okay, there was a little bit of ego in that, like, but it was mostly a true feeling. But it just shows you still have the ego can still get, you know, the hooks into you. So we do have to be that really, which is what that whole video was about, was being really diligent with ourselves about watching for this stuff, because the ego does get very clever, because as your consciousness expands, so does the ego. It's part of you. It's going to do that. It starts to speak your language. So it's why the diligence is so important, that we talk about everything we talk about here at the Infinite Me is about bringing that awareness and that daily kind of
every day
diligence to what you do and how you say things, and reflecting on things and pondering, like you said, that pondering versus thinking thing, like pondering on like a quote that you hear, or just a situation that you went through, and noticing what comes up within you and letting it arise and release, so that you bring more awareness to things the next time you go through something, and then you notice it doesn't trigger you anymore, or you don't have that emotional response now, and then you know that you're free of that pattern, like you've expanded your awareness around who you truly are now, and you've let those egoic forceful patterns, like we're talking about, they seem to dissipate, because they just become irrelevant. They don't operate in your system anymore, because you know that it's not actually who you are. You don't need these little safety mechanisms all the time to be in the world. You can just show up as who you truly are and operate from that space, which is the power. The power part we're talking about.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. All right, well, leave us a comment. Let us know, like, what's your telltale signs that you're in force again? Do you pick up on it? Could you be more diligent in picking up on that? Do to be more diligent. It is really an everyday practice, so it's moment to moment. No one ever escapes that, and you never will, because as we said, the egos are just going to get more and more clever. So we all have to have that journey of bringing ourselves back to the truth all the time, and slipping into the power again.
And that's sometimes where it's helpful to have the support mechanism around you of a community or a coach or something like that, because they can reflect things back to you that you can perhaps not see about yourself, because sometimes when you're in your own story, it's really hard to see sometimes, with true sight, of what's actually going on, because you are pulled by the ego sometimes at times, and you just cannot see it from the space that you're in. So you're blocking yourself from your true power sometimes, and sometimes somebody can help you with that a bit too. So, or it could be just a friend that you talk to is always helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. Very cool. All right. Well,
thanks for joining.
Thank you very much for joining us. And if you got something out of today, please leave a comment, give us a little love heart. And if you haven't followed the page, don't forget to follow the page if you're just seeing this video somewhere. Because every day we are having these conversations. It's important to remember all this stuff every single day. Because as soon as you don't, that's where the ego finds that little doorway again to slip back in, and suddenly you're back into it again, back into forcing stuff.
That's why conversations like these are helpful, I suppose, because they are little daily reminders to bring you back on track, to keep focused on the, who you truly are, not who the ego tells you that you are. So
it's certainly making a big difference to us in the time that we've been doing them since the 1st of July 2019. We've been having these conversations almost every single day. And it's definitely helped a ton. Like, it's been amazing how much it's did in such a short space of time. So it does work, like listening to this all the time. Very cool. All right. Well, we'll see you all
tomorrow, probably.
Tomorrow.
I think,
Okay. Have a fun day. Powerful beings that don't force anything.
Bye.